The last confirmed sighting of all 9 members of the Whitaker hunting party in Ravalli County, Montana, was at the trading post at Darby on October 4, 1893. The post operator, a man named Gus Fabler, recorded the party in his account book. 9 men, their names, their stated destination in the upper Bitterroot drainage above the West Fork, their expected return date of October 18th. He sold them provisions for 14 days. He watched them ride north up the valley road. He noted in the margin of the account book, in pencil, a detail that he would repeat to every official who subsequently questioned him, that the party's leader, a man named Calvin Whitaker, had told him they were hunting elk in a section of the upper drainage that Fabler knew well, and that Fabler had described to Whitaker as reliable country, good elk country, nothing particularly unusual about it beyond the terrain and the season. None of the 9 men returned on October 18th. None of them returned on October 25th, when the first family inquiry reached the Ravalli County Sheriff's Office in Stevensville. The investigation that followed and the camp survey conducted 3 weeks after the party's departure by a search team organized by the sheriff produced a record that has been in the Montana Historical Society archive in Helena since 1894. It has been referenced in 4 published accounts of the Bitterroot Wilderness in the 19th century, briefly, as a footnote to the broader history of the region's exploration and settlement. None of those 4 accounts addressed the camp survey in detail. None of them quoted from the search team leader's personal account, which was donated to the archive by his family in 1961. None of them asked what the single man who came out of the Bitterroot drainage on November 1st, 1893, alone, on foot, unable to walk without support, and refusing to speak about where he had been for 27 days, eventually said when he did speak. Before we begin, drop your location in the comments and tell me what time it is where you are. 9 men rode north from Darby on October 4th, 1893. One came out on November 1st, 27 days later. I want to know where you are sitting when you hear what the camp survey found and what the one man eventually said about it. Ravalli County, Montana in 1893 was one of the younger counties in the Montana Territory, organized in 1893 itself, the same year as the Whitaker party's disappearance, carved out of Missoula County to serve the growing population of the Bitterroot Valley. The Bitterroot River drainage ran north-south through the valley between the Bitterroot Range on the west and the Sapphire Mountains on the east, and the terrain above the valley floor, the high drainages and the ridgelines, was in 1893 country that had been hunted and trapped for decades, but that was not settled, not reliably mapped, and not easily reached or exited once the autumn weather closed in. The elk hunting in the upper Bitterroot was legitimate, and the Whitaker party was not the first to attempt it, but the terrain above the West Fork had a particular character that the more experienced mountain men in the valley understood as requiring respect. Deep drainages, sudden weather, route finding that depended on landmarks that became unreliable under early snow. The Whitaker party consisted of 9 men from the Stevensville area, farmers, a merchant, 2 brothers who had been hunting the Bitterroot since their father had brought them in the 1870s. Calvin Whitaker was the acknowledged leader, a man in his mid-40s who had led hunting parties in the Bitterroot drainage for 15 years and who was regarded in Stevensville as experienced and cautious, not the kind of man who took unnecessary risks with his party's safety. The brothers, James and Thomas Aldrich, were the most experienced wilderness men in the group. The other 6 ranged from moderately experienced to relative novices. The party was well provisioned, reasonably equipped for the season, and guided by a man who knew the country. When October 25th passed without their return and the families of the missing men presented themselves at the Ravalli County Sheriff's Office in Stevensville, Sheriff Mort Alden organized a search party within 2 days. The search party was 11 men, including Alden himself, and it departed for the upper Bitterroot drainage on October 27th. The party's leader, distinct from Alden, who organized the search but was not a wilderness man, was a trapper named Ezra Dodd, 61 years old, who had been working the Bitterroot drainage for 30 years and who knew the West Fork country as well as any living man in the valley. Dodd's personal account of the search, donated to the Montana Historical Society by his granddaughter in 1961, is the most detailed single document about what the search party found. The search party's journey to the camp is documented in Dodd's personal account in enough detail to understand what the terrain required of them. 6 days to cover the 14 miles from the valley floor to the camp location, a rate that reflects the October conditions in the upper West Fork, drainage, where the trail above the valley floor crossed terrain that was wet, and in the higher sections, snow-covered in the second week of the search. Dodd noted in his account that the conditions above 6,000 feet were winter conditions in the full sense, with overnight temperatures well below freezing and significant snow accumulation on the exposed sections of the approach. The search party was equipped for this. Dodd had insisted on it before departure, over the objections of some of the party who thought the late-season conditions were being overstated. His 30 years in the drainage had taught him what October above the West Fork meant, and he had been right to insist. The conditions that the Whitaker party had encountered in the second week of October, if they had ascended to the high basin as Aldrich's statement implied, would have been severe. This is one of the two explanations the record makes available for 9 experienced hunters failing to return from a planned 2-week trip. The other explanation is what Aldrich said at the end of his statement. The search party reached the Whitaker camp on November 3rd, 6 days after departing Stevensville. The camp was in the upper West Fork drainage, approximately 14 miles from the valley floor, at an elevation and in a position that were consistent with what Fabler had described as the party's planned hunting ground. It had not been abandoned in any ordinary sense. It had the quality, described by Dodd in his personal account with the same careful observation he applied to everything, of a place that had been interrupted rather than left. The fire was long dead and the provisions were largely consumed, which established that the party had been in the camp for the expected duration. The equipment, tents, sleeping gear, cooking implements, was in place, personal items were present. The horses which had been tethered at the camp's perimeter were gone, all 9 of them, along with their tack. What was present beyond the camp's contents was material that Dodd described in his personal account as requiring 3 separate inspections before he was satisfied with what he was seeing. The camp perimeter showed signs that he described as consistent with a rapid, uncoordinated departure in multiple directions simultaneously, not a single exit from the camp by a group moving together, but evidence of multiple individuals having moved in different directions, some toward the drainage below and some toward the upper ridge above. This pattern was, in Dodd's 30 years of reading trail sign in mountain terrain, inconsistent with any emergency he had encountered before. Parties that fled a natural threat, a fire, a wildlife encounter, fled together and in a single direction. Parties that fled in multiple directions simultaneously had fragmented, which meant they had been in a state of fragmentation at the moment of departure. Something had split the Whitaker party before they left the camp. Dodd's account describes 3 days spent surveying the terrain around the camp, attempting to follow the departure tracks as far as they remained legible. The tracks below the camp led, on the second day of surveying, to a position on the drainage floor where 3 sets of tracks converged and then stopped, not at a cliff, not at a body of water, not at any terrain feature that would explain why tracks leading to a point would not lead away from it. Dodd described this specific finding in a way that is distinct from the rest of his careful, precise account. I have read trail sign in the Bitterroot for 30 years, and I have never found a place where a man's track ends without explanation. 3 tracks ended here. I circled the area twice. There was nothing. I made a notation and moved on because I could not account for it, and I had 7 more men to try to account for. The single survivor, James Aldrich, the elder of the 2 brothers, was found by a farmer named Walt Brest on the Valley Road near Darby on the morning of November 1st, 2 days before the search party reached the camp. Aldrich was on foot, without horse or equipment, unable to walk without support from a fence post he was using as a staff. He was significantly dehydrated and had signs of exposure consistent with multiple nights in the open without adequate shelter. He did not respond to questions when Brest found him. He did not respond to questions from the Ravalli County physician who treated him. He did not respond to questions from Sheriff Alden or from his own family for 11 days after his recovery began. On November 12, 1893, 11 days after he was found on the Valley Road, James Aldrich gave a statement to Sheriff Alden. The statement is in the Ravalli County Courthouse records in Stevensville. It is 3 pages long. Alden's case notes from the interview, filed with the statement, describe Aldrich as speaking in a low, flat voice without apparent emotion, as though reciting something he had prepared rather than recalling something from memory. He said the party had made camp at the West Fork location on October 6th and had begun hunting on October 7th. He said the hunting had been unremarkable through October 10th, when the party had seen no elk and had decided to push higher on the ridge above the camp the following morning. He said that on the morning of October 11th, the party had ascended the ridge and found in the high basin above it something that he described in the statement as not consistent with any feature of that terrain that I had known from prior hunting in that drainage. He did not describe the feature more specifically in the statement. He said that what happened after the party encountered the feature was something he was not prepared to put into a formal statement, and that he asked that the formal statement end there. Alden accepted this. The formal statement ends where Aldrich asked it to end. In his case notes, Alden wrote, "I did not press him further on the specific events after October 11th. My judgment was that pressing him would produce either silence or an account that would not be useful for the investigation's practical purposes, and that what he had given me was the limit of what he was prepared to give." He looked at me after the statement ended and said, "You would not have gone up there if you had known. Nobody would have gone up there if they had known." There is a detail in the Ravalli County records that does not appear in any published account of the Whitaker Party disappearance, which is the circuit court proceeding from the spring of 1894, 6 months after the disappearance, in which the families of the 8 missing men sought a legal declaration of their deaths for estate purposes. James Aldrich testified at that proceeding. His testimony is in the Ravalli County Courthouse records. It is not his November 1893 statement, which addressed what he was willing to put on formal record about what had happened. It is a different document, a response to specific questions from the family's attorney about the circumstances of the other men's disappearance. In this testimony, Aldrich confirmed the date of the party's ascent to the high basin and stated that he had not witnessed the deaths of the other 8 men and could not testify to their causes. He stated that he had last seen each of the other men on October 11th or 12th. He stated that he had descended alone and that the descent had taken him the period of time that the dates established, 20 days from departure to discovery on the Valley Road. He did not explain what he had done during those 20 days, where he had been, or how he had survived at the elevation, and in the conditions that the search party had found when they reached the camp. The family's attorney asked him to account for the 20 days. He said he was not in a position to do so. The circuit court accepted this and issued the declarations of death. James Aldrich returned to farming in Stevensville. He appears in the 1900, 1910, and 1920 censuses in Ravalli County, still farming, still at the same address. He died in 1934 at the age of 76. He never gave another public account of the October 1893 hunting party. His brother Thomas's body was never recovered. The bodies of none of the other 7 men were ever recovered. The horses were never found. The Ravalli County Courthouse records in Stevensville contain the 3-page statement and Alden's case notes. The Montana Historical Society archive in Helena contains Dodd's personal account of the camp survey. Both are accessible to researchers. Dodd's account is the one that describes the 3 tracks that ended without explanation, and is the one that uses, in its final page, a phrase that has stayed with every researcher who has read it. "I have been in the Bitterroot drainage for 30 years, and I have left it every time I went in. I went in the West Fork above the Whitaker camp, and I came out, and I did not go back. There are places in this drainage where the country does something that I have no name for. The Whitaker camp is near one of those places. I wrote it in my notebook, and I have not talked about it since. I am writing it here because someone should write it down. Today, the upper West Fork of the Bitterroot in Ravalli County is within the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness established in 1963. The high basin above the drainage where the Whitaker party ascended on October 11th, 1893, if it is the basin that the topography of the area suggests, is accessible by a trail that was constructed in the 1940s as part of the Forest Service trail system for the area. It is a legitimate backcountry destination. Hikers and hunters use the drainage every season. The terrain above the West Fork has been mapped, surveyed, photographed, and visited many thousands of times in the century since Dodd wrote that he had not gone back. The 8 missing men have never been found. The 9 horses have never been found. James Aldrich lived for 41 more years and did not discuss it. Here is the question that the Whitaker party leaves behind, and it comes in 2 versions that require different things of you. The first version is the version that Ravalli County's recorded history has always preferred. 9 men entered difficult, high-elevation terrain at the beginning of a harsh autumn, and the terrain killed them in the various ways that terrain kills people: weather, falls, the specific and unpredictable chain of events that produces catastrophe in wilderness conditions. James Aldrich survived because his experience and his constitution and his luck were adequate to bring him out. The 3 tracks that ended without explanation are a detail in a 30-year trapper's account from 1893, and trail sign read 30 years after the fact by a researcher in an archive is not the same as trail sign read by Ezra Dodd with his 30 years of Bitterroot experience. The high basin is a high basin. The country does something that Dodd had no name for is a poet's description of difficult terrain in conditions that the human mind under stress makes difficult to account for clearly. The second version is the one that Aldrich's statement points toward. October 11th, the ridge, the high basin, something not consistent with any feature of that terrain that he had known. Something he was not prepared to put in the formal statement, something that ended his statement with the words, "You would not have gone up there if you had known." He lived for 41 more years. He did not discuss it. Tell me which version you believe. Tell me whether you think James Aldrich knew something that he decided the world was better off not knowing, or whether you think he was a traumatized man who had survived something terrible and needed to build a wall around it to continue living. Tell me whether those two things feel different to you when you sit with them. And tell me this, James Aldrich said, you would not have gone up there if you had known. Not it was dangerous up there. Not the weather was worse than expected. Not we made a mistake, he said. You would not have gone up there if you had known. That phrasing assumes that there was something to know, specific, knowable, communicable information about that specific place that, if communicated in advance, would have changed the decision to go. He had that information. He had it because he had been up there. He chose not to communicate it. He built a wall around it and lived behind it for 41 years, and I have been thinking about what is on the other side of that wall since I found his statement in the Stevensville courthouse records. If these hunting party records and camp surveys and three-page statements that end exactly where the witness asks them to end are the reason you found this channel, subscribe and ring the bell. The statement is in Stevensville. Dodd's account is in Helena. The high basin above the West Fork is still there. 9 men went into the Bitterroot, 1 came out. He lived 41 more years and he did not discuss it. He went back to farming. He appeared in 4 censuses. He died in 1934 in Ravalli County, Montana, at the age of 76 of causes that the death record lists as natural. His obituary in the Stevensville newspaper describes him as a long-time Ravalli County farmer and a veteran of the county's early settlement period. It mentions his brother Thomas among the surviving relatives. He is preceded in death by Thomas Aldrich, who went into the Upper West Fork drainage on October 4, 1893 and was never found, is in his brother's obituary as a loss rather than a mystery. The obituary does not mention the Whitaker party. It does not mention the 1893 season. It does not mention the November morning when Walt Brest found James Aldrich on the Valley Road near Darby, unable to walk without a fence post for support, not responding to questions. James Aldrich organized his life around what happened on October 11th in the high basin above the West Fork, and he carried it for 41 years, and the organization held. He farmed. He appeared in censuses. He gave testimony at the estate proceeding and said as little as the proceeding required. He died in 1934 and was buried in Ravalli County, and the obituary said nothing about it. Whatever he knew that made him say to Sheriff Alden, "You would not have gone up there if you had known." He knew it for 41 years, and he kept. The statement in the courthouse in Stevensville is 3 pages long. The 20 days between October 11th and November 1st are not in those 3 pages. They are in whatever he carried for the rest of his life that he decided nobody needed to know. 9 men went into the Bitterroot, 1 came out. He lived 41 more years and he did not discuss it.